Did you introduce your friend Aunt Hattie?
I did.
Okay. You gotta keep her in mind.
Well, good evening. You all had a good week so far?
Yeah.
Yes? Good week. It's beautiful weather outside, isn't it? It is. Well, welcome once again to another night of this health seminar, and today, I'm looking forward to today's topic, the original diet, and see what Dr. Dence has to share with us. And I don't want to say anything else. I'll let him. But just want to welcome everyone tonight here again to another night of our health seminar. And just real quick announcements. If you are interested in participating in the cooking class, and we've been mentioning this some nights earlier, there is a sign-up sheet at the back, and just sign your name there. The cooking class does cost $50 because he does feed you breakfast, a light lunch, and supper. And it's about a good, starting from 8 o'clock in the morning around to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, of how to prepare what he is going to share with you probably today. So it's, and you get a cookbook to take with you. So you get to take the instructions and how to prepare it as well. If you want to participate in that, you can just sign up at the back, and we'll be more than happy to include you in that. Now, the cooking class will be at the Cleveland First Seventh Adventist Church. It won't be here. That's over in 111 Meadowview, right across from Motel 6 on Henderson. If you just go down, and it's right there in the back in the gymnasium, that is the cooking class where it's going to be. And just another real quick announcements. I know that we may have questions regarding what Dr. Dence is talking about. If we can just hold our questions till right before the end, and he'll be more than happy to answer any questions relevant to each topic of that night. So with that in mind, I'd like to just read the scripture that Dr. Dence chose today, which is Genesis chapter 1, verse 29. Here it says, "And God said, See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth, every tree whose fruit yields seeds. To you it shall be for food." So with these words, let's just bow our heads as we invite God into this meeting. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you so much once again for another night, for another day of life, and we just ask that you be with Dr. Dence as he shares what he has learned, not just through your word, but also through researching and coming out of what is a healthy and happy diet. So we just ask that you open our minds as we learn more. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you very much. Good evening to each and every one of you. I'm happy to see you here again this evening. And those of you who are here for the first time, I welcome you also. Before we get into the topic, I want to play a song. You've already heard me, those that have been coming, you've heard me play the song before. Tonight I'm going to play both the instruments. The one that I played last night in my mouth. And I'll show it to you again. It's a little tiny piece of plastic, okay, that I cut out with scissors. Actually, from one sheet of acetate or film for an overhead projector, I get 86 instruments. And I can get a sheet that staples for about 75 cents or something. So that's probably the cheapest instrument in the world. So the song I'm going to play tonight is "When Peace Like a River." And I'll be playing in the chorus part, I'll be playing the song and the harmony part with the saxophone. So, ready. got it on? Good. All right. So far, we've discussed several different topics, and I'm just going to go through real quick what we've already seen and what we're going to be talking about in the future yet. We already talked about the importance of pure air and sunlight. We talked about the gift of the will, and we talked about the importance of drinking sufficient water, right? And tomorrow evening, we're going to talk about exercise, the importance of exercise, and how exercise can benefit us physically, mentally, and spiritually. Okay? You'd be surprised the benefits that we can reap from doing exercise in a proper way. Then Friday night, we're going to talk about rest. Physical, mental, and spiritual rest. The importance of getting the amount of rest that we need day by day. Okay? And things that can help us get better rest. Alright? Then, Saturday night, which is going to be the last topic, we'll be talking about trusting in God and in His promises. Okay? But tonight we've got a very important topic, and so we're going to get right into it. And jokingly, I tell people we're going to be here till midnight tonight because this is a long topic. Okay? No, not really. I'm not. I'm just kidding. We could be, though, because when we get talking about food, we can go on all night. Okay? Because food is such an important thing. And, you know, there's a saying that says, you are what you eat. Have you ever heard that saying? Well, there's more truth in that than what we want to admit. Many times we don't admit that, you know, you are what you eat. So, we're going to talk some about things that we shouldn't eat first, and then we're going to talk about the things we should eat. All right? And so, but before we do that, I want to bring to your mind the fact that we need to eat to live. But we mustn't live to eat. And it seems like today people live to eat. And of course, the commercial business part of our nation pushes that. Advertisements, signs here and there to eat and to drink and then of course you've got restaurants. Many times in one block there'll be 5 or 6 different establishments of food. And so people are just geared to, while they're still eating this meal, they're already thinking of what they're going to eat the next meal. Okay? And so it seems like today people are living to eat instead of eating to live. All right? Well, just as a car cannot run without gasoline, neither can we without proper nourishment. Okay? And I can remember when we first moved to Mexico back in 1970. My parents and my younger brother and sister and I, we moved to Mexico. The only gasoline that there was in Mexico at that time was a gasoline called Nova gasoline. And of course, in Spanish, this would make sense. Con Nova, Nova. Okay? With Nova, you just won't go. And the thing is, when you fill your tank up, especially the American cars, the Mexican cars, it seems like they were used to it. Somehow or another, their carburation was different or something. But boy, with the U.S. cars, as soon as we'd fill the tank up, man, it'd begin to, you know, skip and miss and just cough. And when you'd stomp on it to try and pass a truck, it'd go blah, 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 and finally you'd get up. But by then you'd missed your chance to pass it. When you turn the key off, the engine would stay, it wouldn't turn off and it wouldn't stay on. And you didn't know what to do yet. Turn the key back on again, wait a moment, and try it again. Now, if it was a standard shift, you could just put it in second gear and let go of the clutch and then kill it. Okay? The reason for that, now the interesting thing about it is, coming back to the States, as soon as we put gasoline here back in, all that would disappear and the car would run fine. Go back to Mexico and again, do it all over again. Okay? The reason was because that was very poor quality gasoline. It had a lot of lead in it. It was very low octane, and many times it was dirty. It had water in it too. Okay? But we're going to learn some interesting things about it. Believe it or not, a poor quality gasoline is the same as junk food diet. It's the same thing. Now, Going back to that gasoline, it would burn a lot hotter. Okay, it would produce more heat in the combustion of it. It would leave a lot more residue in the combustion compartment. And it didn't give nearly as much energy. And this still happens in Mexico, believe it or not. The last couple of vehicles I've had, it gives me the average mileage per gallon I'm getting with it. Here in the States, my car gives me an average, the Buick I'm driving tonight, it gives me an average of 24 miles a gallon in town. It gives you 28 to 30 on the highway. Believe it or not, in Mexico, even with the best gasoline you can buy down there, you can get premium gasoline down there now, it still only gives me about 22 on the highway and about 14 in town. Isn't that something? Almost half. And so, again, we're working with a poor quality gasoline. Well, you know, junk food does the same thing. It requires more heat in our body to be able to process it. It doesn't give our body the nourishment that it needs to have the energy we need. And it leaves a whole lot more residue to be eliminated. Isn't that something? So it overworks our body, and the end results are the same. Both end up in the junkyard. Anyway, I want to discuss a little bit about the consumption of meat. What happens when we eat meat? Okay? To start with, we as human beings were never designed to eat meat. When God created animals and man, certain animals, He prepared them so that if sin should take place, they would be able to clean up those that would be dying. Because as soon as sin entered the world, death also entered. But before sin, even those animals ate grass as the ox. The Bible tells us. Okay? But I want to bring out some really interesting differences and comparisons between meat-eating animals and vegetarian animals. Okay? And these things that I'm going to tell you are simply scientific, physiological differences. Meat-eating animals have great big fangs, great big long teeth from top and bottom, just 2 on top and 2 on bottom. The rest of their teeth are quite small. While a vegetarian animal has sharp teeth in the front and flat teeth in the back. The meat-eating animal doesn't chew its food. As a matter of fact, its jaw can't even work in a chewing manner. It only goes up and down, straight up and down. Whereas the vegetarian animal's bottom jaw goes in a rotating form. So it can chew its food. The meat-eating animal doesn't need to chew. It rips and swallows. Whereas a vegetarian animal cuts and then chews, grinds. God put the molars in our mouth to be able to grind the food that we eat. Okay? Now, the meat-eating animal has a digestive tube a lot shorter in comparison to the vegetarian animals. Therefore, their entire digestive process from the time it enters to the time it exits is only 3 to 6 hours. Whereas with a vegetarian animal, because the digestive tube is 4 to 6 times longer in length, it takes an average of 24 to 32 hours. Okay? The meat-eating animal has digestive juices 20 times the concentration of the digestive juices of the vegetarian animals. Isn't that something? So even if they swallow bone, their stomach can dissolve it and digest it. And even though they eat meat of an animal that's already been dead for 2 or 3 weeks or a month, it doesn't bother them. Okay? But when a vegetarian animal eats meat, the digestive juices are so weak, it cannot digest even the freshest, tenderest meat. And due to the duration of the time it spends in the body, and because of the lack of digestion, it can last 72 hours or more in our body, instead of the normal 24 to 32 hours. Therefore, believe it or not, before it exits our body, it enters a total state of putrefaction. It rots in our bodies. A lot of people come to me, Dr. Dence, I don't know what to do. I have terrible bad breath. And I brush my teeth, and I use this rinse, and I use that rinse. And I tell them, the problem's not in your mouth. The problem's down here, where you've made a graveyard of your body by filling it with dead animals. They say, really? Well, just think about it for a few minutes. If you leave a plate of meat on your dining room table for 3 days, what's the house going to smell like? Okay? So, if a person eats meat and it stays 3 days in our system, don't you suppose it's going to smell too? Well, of course it is. Okay? So, the final point I want to bring out, and this is just really interesting. Meat-eating animals drink water one way, while vegetarian animals drink water a different way. Did you ever stop to think of that? Meat-eating animals lap, while vegetarian animals stop. Isn't that interesting? Now, if we go out here to the water fountain and we turn it on, how do we drink it? We suck it. So are we vegetarians or meat eaters? You never stopped to think of that, did you? Isn't that something? So here, tonight, I have proven to you that we, as human beings, are vegetarians by nature. It's totally unnatural for us to eat the cadavers of dead animals. It was never the Creator's plan that we should eat the cadavers of dead animals. And I'll be very clear with you. Most diseases and infirmities and pains and sicknesses come about as a direct result of eating meat. Isn't that something? Yes. Actually, I'll discuss that in a little bit, in just a little bit, okay? We'll discuss that, okay? So, anyway, I just want to bring that point out. I wanted you to reason with me and come to an understanding. And a lot of these things that I'm just sharing with you tonight, I learned them from the director, the president of the zoo in Brownsville, Texas. We became friends. We lived in Harlingen for a year, and we got a year pass to be able to go as often as we wanted to. And we befriended each other, and I asked lots of questions. And one of my first questions was, how do you know what food to give to each animal? There's so many animals that you've got here. And what he came up with was the drinking of the water. He said, every animal, even in captivity, sooner or later is going to drink water. And we watch them, and by the way they drink water, we know whether they're a meat eater or a vegetarian. And so I said, is there no exception to that? He said, no, no exception. And I looked at him for a while, and I said, yeah, there is. He says, no, there's not. And I said, yeah, there is. He says, no, there's not. And I said, yeah, there is. He said, well, what's the exception? I said, the human being. Oh, he said, I hadn't thought of that. He was thinking of animals. You know? And so anyway, now, some people will say and argue, oh, but Jesus ate fish. Well, yeah, that's true. But back then, you could drink the water out of the Sea of Galilee and it wouldn't make you sick. If you tried to drink the water out of the Sea of Galilee today, you'd probably get diarrhea or something worse. You see what I mean? So, fish have become sick as well today. Animals, in general, have become sick today. Back then, there wasn't nearly the contamination as there is today. Nor did they feed animals the way they feed them today. Today, the cattle that are raised for the meat markets are force-fed. They don't even have a pasture where they can go and eat green grass. They're all penned up, hundreds, thousands of them per pen. And they bring truckloads of food in and dump it in the troughs for the cows to eat. And the food is all prepared with all kinds of chemical stuff because their interest is that they put on all the weight they can before they take them to market. Because the money, okay? They want all the pounds on that cow they can get because that means they're going to get more money for it in the market, okay? They're not interested in the health of the consumer. They're only interested in the health of their pocketbook, okay? So, we have to take charge of our own health by God's grace. Okay? Because nobody else is going to watch out for our health. Okay? Anyway, we can go into a lot of different things. For instance, recently they have found, and it's been for years already, but when I say recently, I'm saying in the last 20 years, 30 years, they have found that cows will fatten up a lot faster if they take the droppings from chicken coops, grind it with oats and molasses, and feed it to the cows. And that includes dead chickens and other stuff that fall. Okay? That's the truth. Okay? And just all kinds of junk they feed the cows. Okay? So then also, they use all kinds of hormones nowadays, you know? And chickens now, it used to take 6 months for a chick, when it's been first hatched out, to get to the size that they could sacrifice it to eat. Today, in 28 days, it's 3 or 4 times bigger than what it used to be at the 6-month age. They actually grow them so big, so fast, that their little legs can't even hold their bodies up. They can't walk. Isn't that something? And in 28 days, they sacrifice them and they're off to Kentucky Fried Chicken. Or whatever other chicken place you want to go to. All right? Church's Chicken, or whatever. Okay, Pollo Loco. Anyway, that means crazy chicken. And that's actually the name of a place, a restaurant in Mexico. Pollo Loco. So anyway, believe it or not, those hormones are being passed on to the children of today that are in growth. And you'll see those kids, you'll see kids 3 years old that look like they're 8 or 9 and they're probably 90 pounds. And I've seen kids that were 9 and 10 that were like adults, okay, already weighing 300 pounds and on Lipitor because their cholesterol levels are too high. Can you imagine? That is sickening. That is just downright wrong. You know, high cholesterol is supposed to be for old people, not for kids. Actually, it's not supposed to be for any people. None of us should have high cholesterol. And cholesterol only comes from the consumption of animal source foods. Did you get that? Cholesterol, high, excessive levels of cholesterol in our bodies comes from eating animal source foods. Those that were here when I talked about the gift of the will, and I said we should abstain totally from those things that are harmful. One of those shots that I gave was abstain totally from all animal source foods. Remember that? So step on some people's toes. The reason is because of the way they're raising the animals today, and because of our bodies not actually being able to digest animal source foods, because we weren't designed for it. For us to eat animal source food is like filling the tank of your gasoline engine car with diesel fuel. Okay? That's basically the same thing. Or vice versa. Fill your diesel fuel engine with gasoline and see how it does. It'll run a lot faster. Anyway, we can go on and on about meat, but I don't want to concentrate on that. I've said enough, and I hope it's penetrated, because it's really important that we understand that most diseases come from eating meat, and the cardiovascular diseases, and we'll get into that a little bit more a little later on. How about refined sugar? Refined sugar is an empty food. It has no vitamins, no minerals, no protein, nothing that can nourish our body. So when we take it into our body, it acts as a dry sponge in a small plate with a little bit of water in it. If you put a dry sponge there, and after 15 or 20 minutes you remove the dry sponge, where did the water go to? In the sponge. Well, when we eliminate the sugar, the minerals and the vitamins that our body should absorb into the bones are leached out in the sugar. Isn't that something? And it affects our bones. It affects our teeth. It affects our nervous system. Believe it or not, children that are given sugar, they're bouncing off the walls. Why? It affects their nervous system. Why? Because the sheath, the protecting sheath of our nerves is where the highest quantity of the softest calcium is in our body. And so the sugar is going to affect the softest calcium first. Okay? So if you take two electric wires, a positive and a negative, and peel off the protecting sheath and then put them together, what happens? There's a spark. Okay? Well, this is what's happening to kids when they eat all this sugary food. And that's why they're out of control, because it messes up their nervous system. But not only that, it messes up our immune system as well. They've actually proven under microscopes that the white blood cells in our bloodstream are the protectors of our body. They are the ones that take charge of destroying bacteria and viruses. Okay? And each white blood cell has the capability of destroying 12 bacteria in a space, 14 bacteria in the space of 12 hours. So it's just a little bit more than 1 per hour. Okay? That's in normal conditions. But with only eating 6 teaspoons of sugar during that same 12-hour period, it reduces the capability of the white blood cells in doing their job 25%. Isn't it something? Now, think of this. In a cola drink, or any of the soda drinks, a 12-ouncer, there's an average of 12 to 15 teaspoons of sugar. If a child drinks that, or anybody, even an adult, it will diminish their immune function, their white blood cell function, 50%. And then if you would drink 2 of those or 3 of those in a day, your immune system is completely immobilized. And then you wonder why you get sick. Now think of this. Have you ever noticed that most people get sick, especially after holidays? Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year, 4th of July. Why? Parties. Okay? You go to a party and while you're waiting for the food to be served, you're drinking soda drinks. Or sweet drinks of some kind or another. It might be Kool-Aid, but that's mostly sugar anyway. An artificial color and flavor. Okay? Then comes mealtime and you're eating your meal, scarf down all kinds of junk that you shouldn't be eating anyway. And at the end, they have dessert. Right? And most people aren't satisfied with 1 piece of cake. They're going to go back for a second piece. And some, when nobody else is looking, they'll go. Of course, I know nobody here does that. So then, after a while, for the Spanish-speaking people anyway, the people from south of the border, you got to have the piñata. Okay? And what's the piñata full of? Candy! And even adults run in there and start picking up candy and fill their pockets. And before long, they don't have any more candy in their pockets because they've eaten it all. And before they go home, you can't go home yet, time for the ice cream. And they bring out, you know, they got the vanilla and strawberry and chocolate, and you tasted all 3. You forgot which one you liked best, so you have to repeat. Okay? Well, I might be exaggerating just a little bit, but it's not uncommon for a person in one party to consume over 50 teaspoons of sugar. Can you imagine? And then you wonder why they're all sick the next day. They got a sore throat, they got a cough, runny nose, fever, and so forth and so on. Because any bacteria or germ that's in the air, they're going to catch it. Because they don't have any resistance, because the sugar has immobilized their immune system. Isn't that something? So, it's not a question of not having anything sweet. But we need to learn which sweets are good. For instance, natural bees honey, cold, what do I want to say? Raw, unfiltered bees honey. Okay? Raw, unfiltered bees honey is marvelous. Okay? Of course, used in moderation. Another very good sweetener is agave nectar, especially if you get the organic raw agave, blue agave. Alright? Another good one is, there's a sugar called sucanat. How many have seen or used sucanat? Okay? Sucanat is just dehydrated cane juice. They haven't added anything or taken anything from it. It's natural, dehydrated cane juice crystals. It's never been heated above 118 degrees. They use fans to evaporate it. And it makes wonderful crystals. It's a delicious sugar. And when we want to use for baking, we'll use sucanat. Okay? And that's a sugar that a person could use without having that effect on the immune system. Okay? So let's keep that in mind and eliminate all those sugary, sweet things. Oh, one other sweetener I'd like to just mention is stevia. How many have heard of stevia? Okay? Stevia is a natural plant that they dry and grind up and make a sweetener. It is 8 times sweeter than sugar, so just a little bit goes a long way. Okay? You have to be careful how you use it. Now, here comes the big one. Dairy products. Cow's milk. Now, I'd like to have you reason with me just a little more. I love to appeal to people's reasoning powers. Because many times we do things without even thinking about it. What is the purpose in the mammals on this earth? What is the purpose of milk? It's an infant's food. It's to feed the infants while their teeth develop so that they can start eating adult food. Once they start eating adult food, in the mammal world, is there any mammal that continues drinking milk as an adult? Only the human being has a baby complex all its life. Yeah. Isn't that something? In all the animals, there's not a single animal naturally that will drink milk. Now, cats, many times we spoil them by serving them milk, and they will drink it. But it's not natural for them to drink milk as adults. Okay? So, why do we think we have to have milk? Oh, you got to have it for the calcium. That's a lie. That's a downright political lie. And if it weren't, answer this for me. This country is second only in consumption of milk to Norway. Norway drinks a little more milk per person per year than the U.S. But other than that, this is the highest milk-consuming country in the world. Why is it the highest in osteoporosis? There's no other country in the world that has the osteoporosis that this country has. So it's kind of contradicting, isn't it? Shouldn't this be the country that has the healthiest bones in the world, if milk is good for your bones? So it's a lie. We've been fed a lie. It's a political lie. We do not need cow's milk ever in our lives, for anything. Okay? Now, let me ask another question. In nature, do you ever see a baby of one species nursing a mommy of another species? No. I have only seen it when humans have intervened. Yes? They'll feed them worms. Yes, that is true. That is true. Well, but that's a little bit contrary to nature as well, because the one bird comes, kicks the eggs of the nesting bird out, and lays its own eggs there and flies away. So then this mommy bird will come and raise those as her chicks. But that's a result of sin. That was not natural, normal. Okay? One time when I was a kid, my brother and I, we were mowing hay, and I was riding the mower, and he was driving the tractor, and the blade was out here going away, cutting away, and I was watching, and when we'd get to the end, I had to lift it up so we could turn and head back down the next road. It was an old-fashioned mower, you know. Anyway, we were going down through it. I saw it kill a mama rabbit. And its nest was there, and there were 2 babies in it, and they didn't get hurt, but I knew those babies were going to die if I didn't do something. I yelled to my brother, "Stop! Baby rabbits!" And I jumped off and I caught them. And I took them home. We had a mama cat that was nursing her kittens. And I snuck them in between the kittens while they were nursing. And you know, that cat raised those kittens. But the strange thing is that mama cat was a tremendous hunter. And she's the only cat I've ever seen in my life that would hypnotize her prey. When she had kittens, she'd go out in the woods. I don't know how she did it. I never actually saw how she did it. But she'd come back walking along, and the squirrel or the rabbit or the chipmunk or the mouse or whatever it was would be running circles around her. Circles and circles and jumping up at her face until she got them to the kittens, and the kittens would make the kill. She was trying to teach the kittens how to make a kill. Isn't that something? And so one time it was a chipmunk, and I just felt so bad for that poor little chipmunk. I didn't want to see that chipmunk get killed. And so she was sauntering along, and the chipmunk running circles around her. She got to the doors of the barn. They were rolling doors, and they were only open just enough for her to squeeze through. And the chipmunk was behind her, and when she went through, I closed the door. And the chipmunk bumped the door and fell back, and he bumped the door again and fell back, and bumped the door the third time. Then he shook his head and looked around, and he headed off for the woods. It took 3 bumps into the door before the spell was broken. Isn't that something? But that very mother cat adopted those baby bunnies and raised them. Isn't that something? But if it hadn't been for human intervention, those little rabbits would have died out there in the nature by themselves. Okay? Another time I saw in Mexico, this lady had a pig that had so many piglets that not all of them could nurse. There was one that couldn't get to nursing, and it was the brunt of the litter. And it would have died naturally, but she didn't want to lose it, so she tied a goat up and stuck that little pig on the goat. And so the goat raised the pig. But that wouldn't have happened again naturally. That goat would have chased that little pig away. Okay? So, again, an interesting thing. Why do we take the calf's food and use it for us? It's totally wrong. There's nothing logical to it at all. Okay? Now, there's so many more things we can talk about. I want to bring out a couple more points. One is the fact that for years, doctors and researchers studied a little gland in our esophagus called the thymus gland. And they couldn't figure out what it did, what its function was, until they studied it in a baby. And they found that in a baby, from birth up till about 3 years of age, the thymus gland produces an enzyme specifically designed for digesting milk. And of course, I'm talking about mother's milk, breast milk. Okay? And at age 3, that gland dries up and never functions again. And so from that point onward, milk is an undigestible food for the human being, because we don't have the proper enzymes for digesting it. Isn't that something? And one more thing I want to bring to your attention about milk. Dairy milk, cow's milk, and its derivatives are the major cause of all respiratory tract diseases. Sinusitis, ear infection, tonsils, throat, bronchioles, lungs, asthma. Okay? These are the diseases that come as a result of using dairy. Now, how about cheese? I gotta touch that point. Okay? How many have ever seen cheese made? You've seen it? You've seen it? Okay? Anybody else? Nobody else? You've seen it? Okay? Now, what they do, at least the native people of Mexico, and I'm sure of other places in the world, they'll take the milk, they'll strain it, and then put it on to boil. After it's boiled, while it's still warm, they'll take a piece of the stomach of the cow. And it's the digestive juices in that piece of the stomach of the cow that as they put that into the milk, it begins a digestive process and coagulates the milk. Okay? Now today, many times they use chemical things, or many companies that make cheese here, even in this country, instead of using the stomach from the cow, they use pig stomach because it has stronger acids that it takes less amount to begin that process of digestion. So cheese is actually like a pre-digested food, you might say. But the problem with it is that when it coagulates, it separates. And you'll see clear water, they call it the whey, it's slightly yellow. And then you've got the big clumps of whatever is gathered together. And you know what it is? It's the fat and the protein. Fat and protein. Okay? Now, believe it or not, 1 cup of whole cow's milk has the exact same amount of fat as what, if that's a cup, 8 ounces, has the same amount of fat as what 8 ounces of beef would have in it. It's equal, the same amount of fat. So, when they coagulate the milk and make it separate, they're actually concentrating the fat. So cheese is a super concentration of animal fat. Now, do we want that in our body? Of course not. Actually, cheese, just the basic cheese, has 3 times the fat as an equal amount of meat. Okay? So when a doctor says, oh, you got to cut down on the meat, cholesterol levels are too high, people stop eating meat, but boy, they pig out on the cheese. And they're actually causing their cholesterol levels to go up. Okay? Because our bodies cannot metabolize animal fat. Isn't that something? It's not. Now, yes. Why do people like wine so much? Why do they like cigarettes so much? Why do they want to be using other stuff that is not good for us? Okay? We have educated ourselves. We've trained ourselves to like things that aren't good for us. Okay? Yes. The devil makes us think bad things are good. Okay? Anyway, there's so much I'd like to talk about this, but we need to move right along because I really don't want to keep you here till midnight. I do want to say one more thing about cheese. Okay? The consumption of cheese is the #1 cause of gallstones. And if you don't believe me, every time you see a person that has had their gallbladder removed, ask them about cheese. Did you eat cheese? Did you like cheese? Did you eat a lot of cheese? And they'll say, oh, I love cheese. And you'll find that they ate cheese every day. And that's what causes gallstones. Good. That's what causes gallstones. It's the #1 cause of gallstones. Isn't that something? And most people have their gallbladders removed because they are heavy cheese eaters. Okay? Good. We'll go on, and then we'll come back. Animal fat. Now, I don't know if I have this chain here exactly the number that it should be, but it's more for an illustration purpose than the actual fact. Fat is made up of a chain of carbons, and animal fat actually has 2 hydrogens to every carbon. And that's what makes it a saturated fat. Okay? Now, when God allowed man to eat meat, He told him he should eat it without the fat and without the blood. And who takes the pains today to remove the fat and the blood from the meat they eat? And that's why there's so much disease today. The animal fat, let me ask you this. If you make a stew and you put a piece of meat in there, and then afterwards you let it cool, you put it in the refrigerator, the fat is going to do what? It's going to come to the top and hard and make a thick, hard cover over the soup, over the stew. Now, is our body temperature warm enough to make that fat turn to a liquid again? No. So when we eat meat and have that fat in it and we take it into our system, that fat turns hard just as it did when you put it in the refrigerator. And our body can't eliminate it. And it builds up on the inside of our arteries and our veins, and it builds up in our tissues because our body can't get rid of it. It gets harder. It gets hard in our body, and our body temperature isn't enough to make it liquid to be able to move it on out and get rid of it. Okay? And so when God said that if we were going to eat meat, we should eat it without the fat, He knew what He was saying. He was saying it for our good. But cardiovascular disease comes directly from eating animal fat. I can't say it any clearer than that. Okay? And it has been clinically proven that if a person will go on a 100% plant-based diet, even though they have their arteries plugged up to the point where the doctors want to go in and do a bypass surgery, if the person will change their diet to 100% plant-based, within 3 months, those arteries will be completely cleared out and their blood will be flowing normally. Isn't that something? And it's been proven time and time again. We don't need open heart surgery. We can get by just by changing our diet to a 100% plant-based diet. I had meant to bring some videos with me if people would like, I have a video called Eating, the #1 cause of disease, disability, and death in the U.S. today. And I think everybody needs a copy. And I can bring them tomorrow night. I meant to bring them tonight, and just too many things happening and I didn't bring them. But it's an hour and a half long, 88 minutes, and it is powerful. It's made by doctors. They're not Christians, but they are doctors. And there's some doctors there that give their testimonies of how one was 44 years old when he had a heart attack. He didn't die. But when they did the studies, they found one artery completely plugged. They took a picture of it. 32 months later, they take a picture of that same artery, that exact same spot, and they compare them in the video. And it's completely clean. Isn't that something? Anyway, vegetable oil has the same chain of carbons, only the first 2 carbons have hydrogens and the last 2 have hydrogens, and that's what allows vegetable oil to be liquid. Okay? But man is so smart. He comes along and says, oh, we need to hydrogenate vegetable oil to make it shortening so we can use it. And that's so much better than animal fat. Oh, it's vegetable shortening. You know what they do? They add the hydrogens and virtually becomes chemically exactly the same thing as the animal fat. So you don't want to use vegetable shortening either. It's not good for you. It'll clog your arteries just the same, only they call that triglycerides instead of cholesterol. Okay? So we don't want either of those in our system. Let's go only with cold-pressed olive oil or grapeseed oil or coconut oil. Now, an interesting thing about coconut oil is that when it gets cold, it turns hard and white just like shortening or animal fat. But the difference is that it turns liquid at 74 degrees Fahrenheit. So it turns liquid at a temperature cooler than our body temperature. And part of the reason of that is that it is a short chain fat. It only has 4 carbons instead of 8. Okay? And therefore, even though it's a saturated fat, because all the carbons have hydrogens, our body can metabolize it okay. And it's all right to use it. Now, I want to clarify something. When I talk about vegetable oils, I'm talking about using them as a dressing or added to the food, but not for frying. Because when you heat the oils, then it changes into a trans fat. And then when we ingest it, it turns into free radicals and begins destroying tissues and causing cancer. So we don't want that either. Okay? So we have to really be careful. God gave us certain foods that have natural fats, like the avocado. That fat is not harmful for you. It will not raise the cholesterol levels or the triglyceride levels. Okay? The raw seeds and nuts, and I stress the point raw, they have the essential fatty acids, and they're good fats for our bodies. Once they've been roasted, then that oil becomes a trans fat, and the body can no longer metabolize it. A lot of it is, oh, Dr. Dence, I can't eat nuts. They give me pimples. They're eating them roasted and salted. If they'll eat them raw, they'll not get the pimples. Okay? So that's the difference. Of course, we like them roasted. They're so good roasted, and especially if you put some chili on them or something like that, some hot pepper. They're a lot better. But anyway, let's go on. I want to explain now why people get diabetes. Okay? Please pay attention to what I want to say, because this is so important. And this was discovered by a Dr. Sang Lee. He was a Korean doctor, and he is a Korean doctor. He was in the United States for many years. He was in charge of the Weimar Health Institute out in California for 17 years. Now he's back in Korea and has his own lifestyle center. Just a marvelous person. I took several classes from him, and I just enjoyed every class I took from him. Every word that came out of his mouth was just full of wisdom. He had 4 doctor's degrees. Okay? And one of them was medical investigation. And he did all kinds of experiments, and one of them was checking on why people get diabetes. And what this represents one of the cells of our body, and our bodies are made up of billions of cells. The fuel for our cells are sugar and oxygen. Okay, we have to have sugar and oxygen in our bodies. And that's why God gave us mangoes, and bananas, and strawberries, and watermelons, and all these wonderful fruits that have natural sugars in them. Okay? So that when we eat them, that sugar combined with oxygen is the fuel that our cells need to be able to maintain life and to reproduce and to regenerate. All right, now, the interesting thing is that sugar and oxygen can only enter the cell when insulin comes into play. The insulin only stimulates a gene on the outside of the cell, making it open so that the sugar and the oxygen can go in. That's the work of insulin. Okay? But insulin can only do its work when both sugar and oxygen are present, ready to go in. If one or the other is missing, insulin cannot work. All right, now, watch the next slide. Those little things flowing along represent the red blood cells in our bloodstream. They convey oxygen to the cells. When we breathe in and fill our lungs with air, the red blood cells that are in the lung tissues at that moment take on the oxygen from that air, and it goes to the heart, and the heart pumps it so that it carries the oxygen to every cell of our body. The sugar is carried by a different portion of the blood. We have many different cells. We have the red blood cells, white blood cells. We have the platelets and just all the different things in our body. I think there's like 8 or 9 different ones. Sugar is carried by a different part of the blood. And up till now, we don't know of anything that disturbs the sugar of being delivered to the cell. But the moment we eat something fatty, what happens? Our red blood cells become coated with a coating of fat, and they clump together. And it makes them move slower. Okay? And in that condition, they cannot take on oxygen in our lungs, nor can they deliver oxygen to the cell. So what happens? Sugar gets there. It says, insulin, I'm here, I'm ready to go in. And the insulin says, oh, hold up, I can't do anything yet. There's no sugar. No oxygen. So the sugar sits there, crosses his arms and waits and twiddles his fingers, and finally says, insulin, what's happening? I need to get in, I need to get burned. And the insulin says, but I can't do anything yet, there's no oxygen. And why is there no oxygen? Because the red blood cells are all clumped together, coated with fat. Okay? This is a result of eating pizza, or eating fried chicken, or any of these other fine, wonderful things that people think are just great foods. Okay? French fries. Anyway, so finally, sugar becomes impatient. Says, listen, insulin, I can't wait any longer. I'm going to go back to the bloodstream, and I'll come back later and see if I can get burned then. And as it goes back into the bloodstream, it raises the blood sugar level. Isn't that something? And that's where, it's so simple. That's where diabetes comes from. So, if we can eliminate the fat from our diet, it won't be long, and the red blood cells will get back to normal and be able to start carrying oxygen again. And this is why exercise is so important for diabetics. So as they breathe deeply, it does help some oxygen finally to start getting through. But as we eliminate the fat from our diet, especially animal fat and fried food fats, then eventually those cells will begin to be able to carry oxygen again, and the sugar will start to get burned again with the oxygen. Isn't that something? I had a case, a lady down in the Valley of Texas. She was a nurse, and we had already discussed health many times through years. I had known her for 8 or 10 years already. But she'd gone through a divorce, and her kids had grown up, and you know how that goes. And so there was a lot of stress and a lot of things happening in her life. And she was about 52 years old, and we met one day, and she says, Dr. Dence, I don't know what to do. I inject insulin twice a day, and my sugar levels are still at 280. And I looked at her, and I said, would I be wrong if I guessed that you ate fried chicken like twice a week? She looks at me and said, oh, you're right. And how about pizza? 2, 3 times a week? Yeah. How about hamburger? Well, once or twice a week. So I looked at her and said, listen, if you go on a totally raw food diet, raw, fresh fruits, raw, fresh vegetables, and raw seeds and nuts. Just 2 meals a day. Breakfast. You can do 3 meals a day, but 2 are better than 3. We'll get into that in a little bit. Anyway, I said, you know what? I can almost guarantee that within 8 days your sugar levels will be normal. You can stop the insulin the day you start the diet. You think so? I said, try it. What's it going to cost you? Just give it a try. A week later, she called me up, Dr. Dence, you won't believe it. I said, yeah, I believe. The 4th day into the diet, her sugar levels were normal. Isn't that something? Praise the Lord. And I had a case about 5 years ago. A lady came to my office, and she was 82 years old, been a diabetic for 48 years. And when she came, she was injecting insulin 4 times a day. And her left foot, her 3rd toe was black. And the doctors wanted to chop off the leg. They told her that was the only solution. She said, look, I'm 82 years old, let me die whole. Why do I want to live without a foot? And so they had given her a date 3 or 4 weeks in advance for them to set up the date for the amputation. And somebody told her about us. And she came. Her daughter brought her. And we talked, and I discussed this with her. And she became excited. And I told her another interesting fact. There's a Dr. Hans Giel in Loma Linda, California. He's in charge of the lifestyle department of the Loma Linda Hospital. And he is also the founder of the CHIP program. Okay? Excellent doctor. I know him personally. And he has started several lifestyle centers and helped thousands of people get off insulin and other medications, high blood pressure medications, and so forth. He wanted an experiment to prove what diet causes diabetes. So he began to try to get people together, volunteers, who would participate in this experiment. Well, nobody wanted to do it because who wants to get diabetes? And he began to understand their fear, and so then he guaranteed them. If he, with the diet, could cause diabetes, with the diet, he could reverse it. Well, once he got that across to the people, he began to get volunteers. And he got 50 volunteers. Most of them were students of the Faculty of Medicine there at Loma Linda. And they ran studies on them to make sure none of them were diabetic or pre-diabetic beforehand. And then he asked them to eat, during 6 weeks period of time, 1 pound of sugar a day. And he gave them a list of the foods he wanted them to eat. Okay? And he purposely chose foods that were low in fat. He didn't want fat in the diet this time. He wanted just sugar. And every day they checked. They'd prick their finger and check to see how they were doing with their sugar levels. And during 6 weeks, not one of them developed diabetes. So they said, okay, stop. That diet, no more. I want you to go on a diet with 75% fat. Okay? Fried chicken, hamburgers, French fries, you know, all the normal stuff, you know, enchiladas, tacos, all this stuff that people love and think is wonderful food for them. And you want to know something? 3 weeks into the 6, every one of them were diabetic. Every one of them, all 50 of them, had diabetes. And they had to actually administer medication to maintain and control until they finished the 6 weeks. Some even had to inject insulin. Isn't that something? And at the end of the 6 weeks, he said, okay, stop. I want you to go 100% plant-based, 100% vegan, and let's see what happens. But believe it or not, in 8 days, not one of them had diabetes any longer. Isn't that amazing? This is clinical proof, folks, that a proper diet can cure and heal people from these diseases. They do not have to be slaves to medication. But the sad thing is, because they think people won't change, they say, oh, you'll be diabetic the rest of your life. Okay? But if a person is willing to change, they can stop the diabetes in a question of 4 to 8 days. Isn't that something? Yes.
So are you saying that fats are worse for diabetes?
Absolutely. That's the cause of diabetes.
So they can solve the sugar?
No.
No.
I already talked about the sugar previously. That's why I put sugar first. Remember, sugar affects their immune system, and the nervous system, and the bones, and the teeth. So, no, sugar's out. But the natural fruits are no problem. They can eat the fruits. And, you know, many times doctors will tell a diabetic, only 3 or 4 strawberries, only half a banana, and so forth. They limit that, and that's not necessary, because that's not the cause of diabetes. Okay? By changing the diet, removing the fats from their diet, they can correct it. Right? So, it's amazing, it's marvelous, it's beautiful when we understand these simple things and are willing to make the changes. If we're willing, God will give us the strength. Okay, but we have to be willing to make the changes. Let's go on. How about refined flour and refined rice, white flour? Do you know why they make white rice and white flour? Okay. Well, how does it spoil? Say it again? Oh, okay. Okay, but there's another way. If you have whole rice or whole wheat in a store without refrigeration and it doesn't sell within a month or 2 or 3, bugs, it gets little black weevils in it. Okay? And the weevil eats the important part of the grain. Yes. I don't know. That's a mystery to me. But bugs won't bother white flour, nor will they bother white rice, because there's not enough food in it to maintain the life of the bug. That's pretty happy, isn't it? You stop to think about it. Does that mean the bugs are smarter than us? Come on. My. Anyway, we'll get into that a little bit more further on. Anyway, many times we think that eating is just to gratify our taste buds and fill our bellies. When actually, the reason for eating is to provide our bodies with the nutritional elements necessary so that through the process of digestion, they may be transformed into healthy blood, into energy, into tissues, muscles, nerves, and bones. That's the purpose for eating. So before we put anything into our mouth, we should ask ourselves, can my body transform this into healthy blood? Can it transform it into tissues of bones, nerves, and muscles? Can it give me the energy that I really need? And all these drinks that are energy drinks, that's all marketing. It's all marketing. There's no truth to that. It's artificial color, artificial flavor, high fructose corn syrup. Now, I didn't mention high fructose corn syrup. And having mentioned sugar, I must add, please don't eat things that say sugar-free. Because the things that say sugar-free on them means that they have aspartame in them. And aspartame is much worse than sugar. It has been proven that aspartame will cause migraines. Aspartame will cause epilepsy. Isn't that something? So we don't want aspartame. Aspartame is the same thing they use in rat poisoning. Yeah, it's sick. Okay? Then I have to talk about high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup. Boy, I don't know how much I should bite off here. It was directly designed by Monsanto's through genetic engineering to produce a chemical lobotomy. Did you understand what I said? A lobotomy, back in World War II and World War I, they would take soldiers and go in through the eye, up into the brain, and sever the frontal lobe from the back part of the brain. From that point onward, that individual had no conscience. They would do whatever they were told. Now, high fructose corn syrup has that same effect in our bodies when we consume it. It destroys the ability of the frontal lobe to be our conscience, to be the center of our brain through which the Holy Spirit can communicate to us. And the purpose of it is to produce a complacent public so that there'll be no revolt, no revolution, no fighting. Okay? Isn't that sick? That is gross. That is downright criminal. But who's going to stop them? We are the ones to stop them by choosing not to buy those products that have high fructose corn syrup in it, or aspartame, because that's another one of Monsanto's doings. Okay? So we have to be really careful. We have to read labels. We have to choose carefully. And remember, I mentioned, was it last night or the night before last? This guy the businessman here in town that I talked with, he said, if you can buy it, don't drink it. And if somebody else prepared it, don't eat it. Prepare it yourself. Make your own drink, fresh from fresh fruits and vegetables. Then you know what it's got in it. Okay? You don't have to worry about it then. All right. Let's go on. The Bible tells us in Philippians 3:18 and 19 that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, whose glory is their shame, who mind earthly things. That's heavy. But many people have made their bellies their gods. I'd like to reference two more texts here real quick. One is James chapter 4. And verse 4. It says, Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. And what does this verse say? Who mind earthly things. We're only thinking about earthly things, fleshy things. Okay, the other text I want to refer to real quick, and then we'll go on, is 1 John 2, starting with verse 15. It says, Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. Amen and hallelujah. That's a beautiful promise. But we have to forget about the things of this world, especially living to eat. Okay? That is thinking on earthly things and making our belly our God. So we don't want to do that. All right? Now, whether therefore, pardon? 15 and onward. I think it was 15 to 17 or 18. I think I read 4 verses there. Whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. Remember, the glory of God is His character. And He wants to see His character reflected in each one of us. Okay? And so whether we eat or drink, let's think about if we are actually learning to glorify God and reflect His character. All right. Now we come to the great question. What should we eat? And the text the pastor read right at the beginning of this meeting tonight, Genesis chapter 1 and 29 says, And God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, or that yields seed, which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of the tree, yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat or for food. Okay? Now here that doesn't talk about any 4-footed animal or any fish this way or that, or any bird feathered thing this way or that. It talks about vegetable source or plant-based foods, right? This was the original prescription of the Creator when He made man. Has God changed? No. We'll talk about that. Let's discuss that. Let's go on. Some say after sin something changed. Well, let's see what changed. Remember, God cursed the servant, and then he told the woman that she was going to have problems, pain, and her desire would be to her husband. And then he turns to the man and says, because you obeyed your wife, curses the ground because of you. Okay? With the sweat of your brow, you're going to have to make it produce. When he was in Eden, he didn't have to work, per se. The stuff just grew. But after sin, he had to work the ground to make it produce. Okay? And God added, thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat what? The herb of the field. Didn't it say in the previous verse, the herbs, every green herb, every herb bearing seed after its kind? So there's nothing changed. It's still the same. Yes.
The other part of the thing was that, when it came from the okra and so forth, it developed fruit, and that would be vegetables or fruit. But when you after the fall, he said you could eat any of the herbs, which means the root systems, flowers, and
Yes. Let me go back.
if you'll go back, you know.
Oops, I'm not going back. Let's go back. One more. There we go. Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed. In other words, all the plants bear seeds after their kind.
But they just through the fruit, not through the root stems. Okay.
It says every herb, and then it says, and all the fruits of the trees. So it's two different things. And anyway, what I'm trying to bring out is it's plant-based. And even after sin, it was still plant-based. There really wasn't a big change. Now, for many years we have taught, oh no, then the vegetables and this and that. But it's still herbs. It's still plants. Okay? All right. Now, when God called Noah to build an ark, telling him that a big flood was going to come and destroy the face of the earth and every living thing, except those things that went in the ark. Those were the only things that were going to survive. Okay? God told him that the animals would come in 2 by 2, a male and female of all the species of animals. But in Genesis chapter 7 and verse 1 and 2, it tells us of the clean animals, they came in by sevens. And actually, I think it was 7 pairs, because it says the male and female. Okay? So I think it was 7 pairs. I think there were 14 of each of the clean animals. Okay? You can check the verse out yourself. It's Genesis chapter 7, verse 1 and 2. Now the reason for that partly was because after the flood, the earth was going to be void of vegetation. And it was going to take time for them to descend out of the rocky mountain of Ararat down to the plains and begin to work the soil and plant the seeds they had carried with them in the ark. And for those to grow and to be able to provide food, it was going to take time. A couple, 3 months at least. Okay? So that they wouldn't starve to death, God allowed the clean animals to go in greater numbers so that they could use them as food until the earth gave its fruit again. Personally, I believe it was a temporary thing. Okay? But man liked it. It wasn't as much work to take and kill an animal and prepare it and eat it. They didn't have to sweat working the soil. Okay? Then later on, let me go back a little bit. Before the flood, man, even though sin had come in, were living an average of 900 years. But after the flood, within 5 generations, because of the consumption of meat, their longevity reduced to only 150. 120. But then if we go to Genesis chapter 90 and verse 10, it says, the years of a man is 70, and the more robust 80, and even then, with all kinds of trials and tribulations. Now I paraphrase that. Okay. So it's interesting, and Moses was the one that wrote that psalm. So it wasn't that far like David. It was before David's time. Okay? Anyway, it's interesting to take these things into account and realize what happened. Today, we aren't even getting to 50 years of age. We're all full of diseases and aches and pains and sicknesses. We urgently need to get back to the diet God gave man in the beginning. Okay? Now, with the children of Israel, it's really interesting. They had gone down into Egypt because of the famine. And of course, Joseph had gone as a slave, sold as a slave by his own brothers. And God used him to preserve life by gathering the abundance during the first 7 years, so that during the last 7 years of the drought, people would have food. And so Jacob and all his family came down into Egypt to be with Joseph. And after some time, when the Pharaoh that was alive, when Joseph was alive, passed away, the next Pharaoh didn't know Joseph. And he made slaves of the children of Israel. And for 400 years they were in slavery. But there came a time when God sent Moses and said, all right, it's time. Bring them out. And you know the story about all the plagues and everything. But as they brought them out, they had prepared food for part of the journey. But there was no way they could have prepared enough food for the entire journey. And after they had crossed the Red Sea and got not too far away, their food was running short. And they said, what did you bring us up here for? To kill us here in the desert? What are we going to eat? Would that we had stayed in Egypt. At least we had food there. And Moses cried out before the Lord, what do I do? God said, don't worry, they'll have meat. Just wait and see. And sure enough, the next day, quail came up over the earth. And they killed and ate. And as they ate, and it was amazing because they didn't have quail just one day. God wanted to show them that it wasn't difficult for him to provide them meat, even in the desert. They had quail for 40 days. Thousands of people died because they overate. They just gorged themselves. But it was God's plan to give them the manna. And simultaneously with the quail, he started having manna come. They didn't even pay attention to the manna while the quail were there. They just scarfed down the quail. They piled it up a yard deep around their tents. And they just scarfed it down, it says, until it came out of their nostrils. That's what the text says if you read it. Okay? And 23,000 died in one day as a result of the gluttony. Isn't that something? Now, after that, they began realizing that the manna was much better. They began gathering the manna, and God worked miracles in the manna, and we'll talk more about that Friday night. But the manna, there's a wonderful commentary about that verse, and I just love it. The author is Ellen G. White, and in her commentary about that, she says that it was God's plan to give them the manna to detoxify their body from the unhealthy diet on which they had subsisted while in slavery, so that when they would enter the land of Canaan, they would be able to enjoy the simple fruits and vegetables that Adam and Eve had eaten in Eden before sin. Because God was about to establish them in a second Eden, a goodly land. The Bible says a land that flowed with milk and honey. That doesn't mean there were streams and rivers of milk and honey. It's a figurative way of speech to say that it was a fertile land, full of good fruits and vegetables. And we have a symbol of that. When the spies went to spy out the land, they brought back one clump of grapes that was so big they had to carry it on a pole between two men. That's awesome. I'd love to taste one of those grapes. And then, of course, they had pomegranates and figs and other things that they had found while they were spying out the land. Okay? So we have the proof that it was a good land. And it was God's plan that they should go back to the diet that Adam and Eve ate in Eden before sin. Now, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you tonight that we are about to enter the eternal Canaan. We're right on the border of the Jordan River. Jesus is coming soon. And we're not taking our frying pans and our barbecue pits with us to heaven. I can guarantee that. God wants us now to prepare by eating the simple fruits and vegetables so that when we get to heaven, we can enjoy that simple diet that Adam and Eve ate in Eden before sin. Because we're going to be again without sin there. Okay? And it's time that we start practicing the diet of heaven, or we won't be happy there. Okay? So, interestingly enough, the Israelites ate just 2 meals a day instead of 3. It wasn't until after King Solomon that they began eating a 3rd meal in the night, because that's when work was over, they could go ahead and get drunk. Okay? That's when supper came in. And of course, the pagans had been practicing supper already for hundreds of years. So that was a pagan custom. But God's plan was that we should have just 2 meals a day. A good breakfast and a good dinner. Okay? This won't make any sense to people who speak English, but for those who speak Spanish, the 3rd meal, la cena, se almacena. Okay? The 3rd meal just stores itself. That's what that means. We don't burn it up, because what do we do after eating our supper to burn it? Nothing. We go to bed. So the body doesn't burn it, it just stores it. All right, let's go on. Daniel and his 3 friends. A marvelous example. Even though they were in captivity in a pagan country where they could have said, oh, we just got to do whatever they tell us or they'll cut our heads off. They weren't worried about getting their heads cut off. They purposed in their hearts not to contaminate their bodies with the hamburgers of McDonald's, the Coca-Cola of Wendy's. That's the food of the king today, isn't it? Seems to be anyway. It's so popular. We need to purpose in our hearts not to contaminate our bodies with those foods that will only cause disease. But eat those foods that give life. Live foods. Okay? Foods that come from plants. And then we will be able to have life too. Subway is one of the better places to eat out there. If you choose the whole wheat bread, no cheese, and all the veggies. Okay? So Subway would be one of the better places. When we travel many times, we will stop and have a Subway. And some Subways do have a veggie patty. Okay? You call it a Veggie Max. Ask them if they have a Veggie Max. If they say, what? You know they don't have it. Okay? But if they say, yes, we have it, then you're all right. Anyway, Daniel and his 3 friends. A marvel. And they were just youngsters. They were early teens. Okay? And God blessed them. They were 10 times smarter, 10 times healthier and wiser than all the rest of the wise men of the land of Babylon. Okay? And so that can happen to each of us today if we are willing to purpose in our hearts. All right? Well, I want to run through real quickly, and before we get started, if I could get a couple people to hand out some handouts that I have here, please. And I'm going to ask you to go directly to page 4, if you would, please. This is a cleanse program. This is a diet program, a detox program. I tell people it's an oil and filter change for their body. You know, how often do we do an oil and filter change for our car? Every 3,000 miles. Well, how often should we do an oil and filter change for our body? And who's ever done an oil filter change for their body? Okay? Our body is a living machinery that needs maintenance just as a car does. And so this is a cleanse program. You can look it over later on, but I'd ask you to open, please, to page 4. And we're going to look at the 5 basic categories of foods that are underlined on that page. Okay? And we're going to talk first about fruits that are on the right-hand side of the page. Okay? Fruits. And fruits are an important part of our food. Okay? Fruits give us vitamins. Okay? We get a lot of vitamins when we eat fruits. Alright? Now, let me ask you, how do we categorize fruit? What identifies what food is a fruit? It has the seed inside. Okay, you see that papaya right there all cut open nice and pretty? And the kiwi, and you can cut apples and other things, and the seeds are in the center. Okay? And an interesting thing about fruit is that we should not eat them until they are totally ripe. Because only once they have gotten to total maturity have they developed the enzymes that we need to be able to digest them. So if we eat green fruits, we could get empachado, we could get indigestion because they can't digest properly because they haven't developed the enzymes to be able to digest them. Okay? So fruits should be eaten only once they have been totally ripened. Alright? I know that's difficult when we buy in the regular grocery stores because all the fruits have been picked green to be able to ship them. And this is what's good about being able to go to a farmer's market and getting fresh things because they're generally picked that very day. Alright, so that's the difference between a farmer's market and a regular grocery store. Okay? So, yes, anything we can buy at a farmer's market, much better. Alright? Very good. Let's go on, number 2, vegetables. Now the vegetables provide for us specifically minerals. Alright? But, how do we categorize what a vegetable is? And vegetables have 4 different points of reference. First of all, anything that is a root. Okay, potatoes, carrots, beets, and so forth. They're vegetables. Anything that's a stem, like celery. Anything that's a leaf, Swiss chard, collard greens, mustard, and so forth. And anything that's a flower. These are all vegetables. They all come into this category as vegetables. The interesting thing about vegetables is that they can be eaten in any stage of their development and they have all the nutrients and the enzymes and the things our bodies need. You know, it's really interesting. Now, there are some foods that are kind of a crossover. And I'm talking specifically of, for instance, cucumbers and squash. They would actually be referenced as a fruit because they've got the seed inside, but the plant, you can clip off the fresh sprout on the end of the plant and cook it up and eat it, and it's delicious. Or you can pick the squash flowers and cook them up, put some cilantro and some garlic and onion with it. Oh, they're so good in a hot tortilla. Okay? And you can too. You can eat them raw, but they have a lot of prickly little hairs on them. Once they're cooked, then the prickly little hairs are gone. Okay? The root of the chayote plant. How many are acquainted with chayotes? Okay. A chayote is a pear-shaped squash that has only one single seed in the center. And they're delicious. But it has a root that you can dig up. Quite a large root. And you can dig it up and cut it up and bake it or steam it, and it's delicious. It's even better than the chayote itself. Okay? So it's really neat. You can eat almost any part of a vegetable plant, and it's good for you. And those fruits that I mentioned, squash, pumpkins, and so forth, they can be eaten with vegetables, and they're fine. Okay, a lot of people think, oh, it's a fruit, you got to eat it over with fruits. No, that's not necessarily true. Just because it has the seeds inside, they can still be eaten with vegetables, and that's fine. Now, you could eat them with fruits too if you wanted to. Okay? But as a general rule, we consider those as vegetables, actually. Okay, in that list that I have before you, right in the center at the top, it's got neutral foods, and avocados, and tomatoes, and papaya, and pineapple, and olives are actually fruits because they have the seed inside, but they can be eaten with vegetables, and it's fine. Okay? All right, let's go on. Next category, whole grains and cereals. Whole grains and cereals give us carbohydrates and fiber. Okay? And they're important for us. It's a good fuel food, and it's something that sticks to the ribs and carries you throughout the morning. All right? But how do we categorize a cereal? A cereal is a seed of a grass plant. Okay? All your grasses have seeds, and they can be eaten as cereals. Isn't that interesting? So, all your cereals are grass seeds. Even corn. Corn is a humongous grass. And I don't know if I can say the word properly in English, but plants are separated in 2 categories. The grass plants are all monocotyledonous, That's what you say in Spanish anyway. And the other planes are all bicotyledonous, which means that they come up and separate into two, where all the grass ones come up as a single spire. Okay? So that's where you separate what cereals are and what other vegetables and plants are. Isn't that interesting? So these are good foods, but they should be eaten whole grain, not once they've been refined. And I want to show you the difference. Well, here we've got a picture of wheat and then also sprouted wheat. How many have ever eaten sprouted wheat? It's pretty awesome tasting, isn't it? And it's good food for you. You can eat it raw that way. And it's delicious, and it's full of all kinds of nutrients. When you sprout a seed, it actually increases in food value 6 to 10 times. Isn't that something? So man, you're eating a super food when you eat sprouts. We eat sprouts all the time in our house. We sprout alfalfa, lentils, and broccoli, and radishes. Well, we just go into the sprouts. Lentils, we sprout lentils. All right, now I want to show you the difference between a whole grain and what they do to a whole grain to make it a not whole grain. Okay? This is a whole grain. This little brown coating around here is called the bran. It's the outer protective coating of the seed, and it's loaded with vitamin B and minerals. Now, it doesn't say there, but it has antioxidants in it also that naturally preserve the seed until it has fulfilled its purpose, which is either that we eat it or it's planted and grows again. Here at the bottom, we have the germ. Now, that's the part that when that falls on the ground, it becomes moist and the sun hits it. It sprouts. The spire comes up out of that, and the roots come out of the bottom. Okay? That's the heart of the grain. And it's loaded with all kinds of food value. B vitamins, phytochemicals, and minerals. And vitamin E also. Okay? So it's a marvelous food. And what's in the middle is called endosperm. And it's only got carbohydrates and just a little bit of protein, a little bit of B vitamins, but mostly carbohydrate. So all it does is fattens. Okay? So we want to be sure that we use the whole grain foods. That way we get all the nutrients God put in the seed or in the cereal for us. Now, some people say, does that mean we can't use boxed cereals anymore? There is a boxed cereal called Kashi. K-A-S-H-I. Kashi. Okay? And they use whole grain, organic cereals. They don't put any chemicals in them. They use the dehydrated cane juice crystals. And if you want, we like those for Sabbath morning. So we don't have to cook anything on Sabbath morning. But the rest of the week, we cook cereals. We eat cooked cereals in our breakfast at home. Okay? Along with 2 or 3 fruits. You'll find a description of a good breakfast, lunch, and supper on the bottom of that page that you're looking at, page 4. Okay? So anyway, let's remember, we should use these foods in the most simplest way possible. The fourth one are the raw seeds and nuts. Now, how do we categorize seeds and nuts? Seeds and nuts are those foods that are found inside a shell. Okay? Seeds and nuts, all of them grow inside a shell. And they are a marvelous source of protein and fats. Okay? Some seeds, like sesame seeds, is 49% fat, believe it or not. But it's good fat, and they need to be used raw, not roasted. Okay? Now, I want to talk about protein a little bit. A lot of people that change to a vegetarian diet are afraid they're not going to have enough protein. We've been deceived about protein. We've been deceived to think we've got to have large amounts of protein to be able to maintain health. But I want to share, in Mexico there was a vegetarian restaurant down in Monterey, and they had a beautiful poster in their restaurant on the wall, and it said, if you want to be strong like a bull, don't eat the bull, eat what the bull eats. And I love it. You know, a bull is a strong animal. They have tremendous muscles, and yet all they eat is grass.
Dr. Dence, I have testimony that when I changed my eating habits about 3 years ago, and I didn't think I had to do it without protein. And so at first I started eating a lot of beans, but I never had a problem. I'm not a big bean person, so I stopped soda on beans, and I've never had, I had my problems. Never once have I had an issue with my
That's wonderful. Thank you for that testimony. That's beautiful. And this is what we want. You know, we want to be able to increase our health, and we can do it if we'll just make these changes. All right? So, meat has an average of 17 to 18 grams of protein per 100 grams of edible portion. You know what? Every seed and nut has at least that much. But some supersede. Sunflower seeds have 22 grams of protein. There's no meat that has that much. Peanuts have 25 grams of protein per 100 grams of edible portion. And believe it or not, pumpkin seeds have 30 grams. And you can eat these raw. Yes? Generally, with the seeds and nuts, we encourage not to eat more than 1/4 of a cup of any one seed or nut per meal. Okay? Now, if you're going to mix them all together, take 1/4 of a cup of the mixture of them and eat only 1/4 of a cup. You don't want to eat 1/4 cup of each one. Of one, and I like to really encourage people to vary. Have one seed one time, another seed another time, a nut another time, almonds another time, and so forth. Okay? So, we have higher quality and higher quantity of protein in the seeds and nuts than any of the meats have. And then we have to have, let me say it this way. Actually, when we eat meat, we're getting the protein second-handed. Okay? The animal got it from the grass it ate. And almost all your vegetables have protein. We don't have to worry about a deficiency. And I'm here to tell you that because I'm a living example of that. Okay, I've been a vegetarian all my life. And some years ago, I had been traveling much more than what I should have been. I was not getting the sleep I needed. I was changing time zones. And I just felt run down. And I got back to Montemorelos, and I went to the hospital there in Montemorelos, in Mexico. And I told the doctor what I was feeling. And I had been working with some people that had tuberculosis and hepatitis B and C. And I said, you know, I want to rule out any thought that I might have contracted something that I don't want. So I went to the doctor there in Montemorelos, and I said, look, I'd like to have you run a bunch of tests and just check it out. Check my liver, check my lungs, make sure that I'm okay. So they drew 5 tubes of blood, and as we sat and talked, and we discussed different things, and I told him I was a total vegetarian. He said, would you allow me to do a couple more studies on your blood? And I said, like what? He said, I'm interested to know how you're doing on your total levels of protein and your B12 levels. You've got plenty of blood. Go ahead and do it. I said, even more, my daughter's here with me. My oldest daughter's what, 15, 16? I said, pull some blood out of her and check it too. She's been a vegetarian all her life too. She's a 2nd generation. Actually, she's a 4th generation vegetarian. Believe it or not, my grandma, my father's mother, was a vegetarian almost all her life, and she died at 98 years old, and she died on her feet. That day she'd written letters and taken them to the mailbox herself. And she came back, and she was at my aunt's house up in New York, and my aunt said, well, Mom, come and let's have dinner. And she said, well, let me go to the bathroom and wash my hands. And she went, and when she came back, she leaned on the chair and said, you know, I just really feel tired today. And my aunt got up and hugged her and said, well, Mom, what do you expect? And it was her birthday that day, her 98th birthday. So you're 98 now, and she just sighed a big sigh, and her body went limp right there in my aunt's arms. My aunt laid her down on the couch and started calling relatives. You know, that's the way we should go. You know, and she was a vegetarian over 75 years of her life. And then my dad, and me, and my daughter, she's 4th generation vegetarian. So he drew blood on her too. And believe it or not, the study came back showing that we were above average in protein and B12. Isn't that amazing? So you don't have to be deficient. Yes?
What information do you have on genetically engineered vegetables and seeds and those things?
You know, we've come to a point where it's a question that we either grow it ourselves or buy organic. Okay? And try to get things that say non-GMO, because we don't want GMO stuff. All the experiments...
But they're not labeling those things.
Yeah.
So that's the problem.
It is a problem.
And it's financial because many individuals wanted these companies to do it, but the politicians and Monsanto and many of those large companies they do not want to be labeled
That's
because
right.
it's going to affect their bottom line.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, they're trying to get it controlled because they can only patent foods that are genetically rearranged. They can only patent those. They can't patent heirloom seeds or open pollination seeds. They can't patent those. And so they want to be able to patent it. Yeah. Yeah, this is killing the bees off. That's part of the reason. Cell phone waves are also having effect on bees. Anyway, we need to finish up. I hate to see people leaving. We're almost done. I want to be able to finish this up, and then and we can open for questions and answers. And those who would like to, once we finish the topic, then they can go while we discuss a little bit more. But food is a big thing. It's important. But we need to eat the right foods at the right times. All right? And I can really get into this. You know, we should learn to eat, as I mentioned, 2 meals a day, nothing between meals. And, you know, they did an experiment once. They took 10 people and gave them a common, ordinary breakfast, a breakfast I don't approve of. They gave them cornflakes with milk, 2 slices of toast, and 2 eggs, and a cup of orange juice. And then they watched their stomachs with ultrasound to see how long it would take for their stomachs to become totally empty. And of the 10, it averaged out 4.5 to 5 hours. So then, a week later, they asked the same people to participate in the second phase of the experiment. They gave them the exact same breakfast. Only 2 hours later, they asked the first 2 of the 10 to eat a fruit of their choice. The next 2, a bowl of Jell-O with some cookies. The next 2, a piece of bread with some peanut butter and jelly. The next 2, an ice cream cone. And the last 2, a chocolate candy bar. And then they observed their stomachs. And you know what they found out? Just with having eaten the fruit, 9.5 hours later, there were still residues of the breakfast in the stomach. It wasn't able to finish the digestion like it had before. So actually it was 11.5 hours altogether, the 2 hours previous. Okay? And then each group was progressively worse, and the chocolate candy bar was the worst of them all. 13 hours later, more than half of the breakfast was still in the stomach. And then people wonder why they get tummy aches, why they have acid reflux. Okay? They want to be eating all the time. And today, it's a big thing that doctors are recommending people and nutritionists that have weight loss programs eat every 2 hours. Eat a small meal every 2 hours, 6 meals a day. That is wrong. It was never God's plan that we should eat that way. That we are not grazers, like deer and cattle. Okay? Anyway, one more point I need to mention. The importance of not drinking water with the meal. We should drink a half hour before or wait until an hour after. Okay? So that our stomachs will be able to digest the food properly. Drinking with the meal causes all kinds of indigestion and acid reflux and gastritis and all these digestive problems. All right, let's go on. The last category. Oh, here's the seeds and nuts with the shells on them. Okay? That gives you that visual. All right, the last category, the legumes. Okay? Now, how do we categorize legumes? Legumes are all those foods that come in a pod. Okay? Anything that comes in a pod is a legume. Okay? So, the legumes, once again, give us protein. And again, all your legumes have an average of 15 to 18 grams of protein per 100 grams of edible portion. But there's a few that are above that. Garbanzos have 25 grams of protein. And soybeans, of course, are the highest. They have 34 grams of protein. But another excellent protein food, if you want to add a little extra protein, is your nutritional yeast flakes. Nutritional yeast flakes is a marvelous superfood. It has an average of 50% protein, and it's got all the B vitamins, including B12. Okay, so it's a superfood, marvelous food. And all your seeds and nuts are amazing also. Okay? So we need to have these foods in our diet. Now, we mustn't overdo on them. And many times it's best to eat them in their fresh before they've gotten hard, staked. Okay? And of course, if they do get hard, you can partially sprout them before cooking them, or at least soak them overnight. And that helps them be more digestible and more agreeable also. Okay, and I mean not producing so much flatulence. All right? All right, now we're coming to the end. As you can see, eating vegetables helps keep us in shape. What do you think of those beautiful legs and the mini skirts? Huh? All right. Here are a few of the very most famous people in the world, and believe it or not, they are vegans. Okay? And believe it or not, more and more people are becoming vegan amongst those who are famous. Movie stars, athletes are becoming vegan because they are finding out that they're able to perform better being vegan than when they're eating meat and other things. Isn't that something? Yes, and they look better. Yes, absolutely. And so they're doing it for vanity. They're doing it for a corruptible crown. But we an incorruptible crown. All right? So let's remember that. And there's a book by the name Counsels on Diets and Foods that says that these foods that I've just introduced to you, prepared in the simplest way possible, closest to nature, free from grease, proportion or provide energy much superior to those foods that are more condimented and more prepared. Okay? And there's another statement that almost repeats that first part exactly, but the last part is a little different. It says those fruits and vegetables, prepared in the simplest way possible, closest to nature, free from grease, will be the food upon the tables of those preparing for translation. I don't know about y'all, but I believe Jesus is coming in our day. Yeah. I believe there are some of us who are here tonight that will not taste death before Jesus comes. I believe it with all my heart. And I believe there's some of us here that will be translated to heaven without going to the grave. And I pray that I can be one of those. Okay? So, if that is my desire, what am I going to be eating? These foods that I've been sharing with you tonight. In the simplest way possible, closest to nature. That doesn't mean fry, you do with all kinds of stuffing. Okay? If you have to cook them, steam them or bake them. Alright? Free from grease. And of course, we should eat most of our food, at least 50% raw. At every meal, we should have at least 50% raw. Alright? And you'll find that your health will increase abundantly. Now, I want to finish with this thought. What is the food for our soul? The Bible. The Word of God. And did you know, Revelation 22, 1 and 2 describes the holy city, the throne of God. And it says there's a river coming out of the throne of God. And then just below that there's a tree that has two trunks, one on either side of the river, and it joins together at the top. It's the tree of life. And that tree produces 12 fruits, one fruit per month throughout the year. But it says the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Now, I believe that when we are glorified, we're going to have the same stature we have now, and the antediluvians will have the stature they had before. The antediluvians' head would touch those lamps up there. Then, as we eat the leaves of the tree of life, we will grow. And then we will grow to the stature of our ancestors. Okay? It's going to be amazing. I can't wait. But we can start partaking of the leaves of the tree of life now by eating the leaves or the pages of the Bible. Every page in our Bible is a leaf off the tree of life. And it doesn't mean we have to tear them out and stick them in our mouth and chew them out. I'm talking about reading them, studying them with prayer, searching the message God has in His Word for us. And we can start living eternal life now and here. I invite each of you here tonight to determine by God's grace from here on to start living as if we were already living eternal life. And even though we should die on this planet, we will be resurrected and spend eternity with God if we make this the priority instead of the food Christ. Now remember, our first parents fell on the point of appetite. And Christ overcame in that very point. He said, not only by bread shall man live, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of the Lord. So I encourage you tonight, and I invite you, let's determine, as Daniel and his 3 friends, not to contaminate our bodies, but to fill our minds and to eat the Word of God so that we can grow and eat those foods that we'll be eating in heaven later on. God bless you. Now, I don't know if there's any more questions. If anybody has to leave, feel free to do so at this time. But if there's questions in relation to what we've discussed tonight, or any of the other topics that we've discussed so far, go ahead and feel free. Yes, Paul.
I was wondering about sauteing food, like instead of using oils, can you use water instead of sauteing onions?
You can, yes. Now, I'm not saying we should never use any oil at all in the frying pan.
So it's okay to use a
But if you put some, it should be just barely enough so that the stuff won't stick. Well, we don't want to put in so it's swimming in oil. Okay, deep frying stuff. That's terrible.
About the 2 meals a day, I heard something not too long ago, I just wanted your opinion, about when we go to bed on an empty stomach, is it true that for children, they're still growing their growth hormone habits while they're asleep on an empty stomach? For an adult, it's more of a, instead of a growth hormone, a repair hormone.
That is true. Now, I want to clarify that point about 2 meals a day. 2 meals a day are for adults. Children that are in growth, now if you stop to think about it, when a baby is first born, they need food every 2 hours, day and night. Okay? For the first few weeks. And then little by little, if the parents have the discipline to discipline the baby and bring them into a schedule, they can give it every 3 hours. And then after a month or 2, then they're sleeping most of the night and having their meals every 4 hours during the day. Well, that's fine until they're a year old, or 2 years, 3 years, then they need to go just 3 meals a day. And it's okay with having 3 meals, but the breakfast should be the main meal, and the lunch and the supper should be a light meal. Fruit with something simple. Okay? Then, when they get to their 20 years of age where they've stopped growing, then they need to go to just 2 meals a day. Yes? Supplement vitamins are really only needed if we're not eating the foods that we should. Now, I say that with some reserve because today the foods, even organic foods, don't have the vitamins and minerals organic foods had 20 years ago, or 50 years ago, or back at the turn of the century, the 1900s. Okay? So, but there are some foods that are superfoods. Okay? Like alfalfa is a superfood, parsley is a superfood, pumpkin seeds are superfoods, sesame seeds are a superfood, rice bran is a superfood. Okay? When my parents were in Colombia, South America, on the river, they would frequently encounter children that were 4, 5, 10 years of age and unable to walk because of malnutrition. And they would leave them a bag of 2 pounds of rice bran and indicate that they should eat 1 tablespoon in every meal. And in the turn of 2 or 3 months, those kids are up and running and playing like any other child. And so, it's a super food, and you can buy it at a family nutrition center. Okay? They have it there, yes? That is correct. It is depleting. And this is why it's important that we organic grow. We need to grow our own foods at home, as those that can. And you don't have to have a big plot of land. I've grown a garden in 3 feet square. I've had 4 tomato plants, 2 rows of lettuce, and 6 rows of radishes, just in 3 square feet. Okay, you can do that. Yes?
What do you think of these substitutes like Worthington and Loma Linda? What about these substitutes?
Okay, read the ingredients. You know, they are such complex foods. They're super complex foods. They've got 30, 40, 50 ingredients in them. And those are complex foods. Our stomach has a hard time breaking them down because they're just too complex. Okay? Many of them do have egg white. Some even have casein or casein, which is a milk derivative. And so we have to be careful. I'm not saying never to use them. If you're going on a picnic, go ahead and get some, what do you call them? Big Franks, the vegan ones. All right? And that's fine in a sandwich. Okay? But I don't think you should have them every single day. All right? We should be careful about that. Let's have this one and that one, and then you. Yes, go ahead.
When you were talking about milk and how it's not good for you, does that include soy milk?
No, not at all. Now, soy milk should be the organic soybeans and the non-GMO. It's important that you make sure of that.
How about almond milk?
Almond milk is wonderful. Now, Sunday, in the cooking school, I will be making 4 different milks. I'll be making almond milk, pumpkin seed milk, sesame seed milk, and coconut milk. And you'll get to try all of them. All right? That's part of the program. Yes, sister? Yes, soy milk is fine for children. They can be raised on soy milk right from birth. No problem. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. I don't know here actually. I really don't know. But most of those gallon jugs there at the Walmart. Now Walmart has a machine there. You can stick your jug under it and open the faucet and fill it. Those machines are okay. Family Nutrition has wonderful water. If you look on the inside of the machine at Walmart, it tells the different processes that are used to purify the water that you're drinking there. And that's good. You know, of course, again, those machines need to be maintained. And generally on the opposite side, there's a list of the dates that it's been maintained.
On the soy milk, doesn't it, like the children grow?
Okay. What they've discovered is that soybean, if not properly processed, has an enzyme that will inhibit growth in laboratory animals. Okay? But if it's properly processed, then there's no problem. And they have found that the microwave will destroy that enzyme. So most of the foods prepared from soybean have been microwaved before, and they just run through a tube that has a microwave in it. And so they're just falling through it. It's not a prolonged period of time, but that's enough to destroy that enzyme. Now, I was affected in my childhood from that enzyme. From age 7 till age 16, I didn't grow an inch or a pound. Okay? From age 7 to age 16, I weighed 75 pounds and was 4'10". Okay? Now, it's interesting because we grew our own organic soybeans. We processed them ourselves, but we were not processing them properly. We weren't cooking them enough, okay, to destroy that enzyme. And I think that that enzyme had a role to play in my body. And when we moved to Mexico, praise the Lord for Mexico, when we moved to Mexico, we stopped using soy and started using almonds and pumpkin seeds and other things, and I grew 10 inches in 1 year. In 1 year, I grew 10 inches. And so, praise the Lord, I'd be this tall, you know, if it hadn't been for going to Mexico. So I praise the Lord for having gone to Mexico. You had a question? Mushrooms. Well, mushrooms are a debatable food. Many people say, oh, they don't have seeds. Well, they do. They have spores, and then they reproduce through those spores. That would be their seeds. Now, they're a food that is rich in protein, and they are high in B vitamins. And personally, I like mushrooms, and I eat them. Some people go to extremes, and I will be talking about extremes on Saturday night. Okay, so we have to be careful of the extremes. Yes? One thing is that many times we don't chew enough. Okay, we need to learn to chew. God has given us the grinders to grind, but many times we chomp, 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 and whoop, down it goes, because we're always in such a hurry. We're always looking at the watch. You know, when it comes time to eat, we need to sit down and forget the watch. Okay? And take time to chew. It's better to eat a small amount, well chewed, than to gobble down a bunch of food not processed by our teeth. Now, I believe that by chewing, those foods will be broken down enough so you won't have that problem. Right? Then also another thing, if you do the Dence program, that'll help your body so that you'll have the digestive juices and whatever you need to digest it. Yes?
On supplemental plasmids, are there some like cheese, some to stay away, like synthetics?
Okay. I have a thing with, a lot of people will want to go to Walmart to buy vitamins and supplements. I'm not into Walmart supplements. They take whatever the health food industries reject because they've been found with pesticides, or they're not organic, or they've been irradiated, or some other problem, and Walmart takes them and uses them and sells them for $4 a bottle. Okay? So personally, I will not use anything as far as food supplements are concerned from Walmart. Now, I encourage people to go to the health food store and buy them. Nature's Plus is a marvelous brand name. Now has some wonderful products. They are conscientious in what they do of getting organic, food-based vitamins and minerals. Okay? Yes, Paula?
I know that they have soy, almond, and coconut milk in stores. So, is there certain ones that are better than others, or is it better to make your own?
I like to encourage people to make their own. And like I said, Sunday in the cooking, in the food preparation class, I will be demonstrating how to make them. And that way they're raw. If you buy them already made, they're all cooked already. And soybean has to be cooked. Okay, I'm not saying anything against that. But it's important, if possible, to get the ones that say organic and non-GMO on them. And even with the tofu. You know, tofu is a marvelous food. Chinese people have been using tofu for more than 3 millennia. Isn't that something? And so tofu is a marvelous food, and we need to learn to use tofu. And it's good for us. Okay? Yes? Sí, dígame.
Acerca de la chía.
Chía.
Se debe dejar en remojo, se la puede comer uno en seco. Porque cuando yo la como así seca, mi estómago como que...
She's asking about the chia seed. The chia seed, if you're going to eat it without soaking it, it's better to grind it up first. Okay? Grind it up and go ahead and powder it onto your fruit or in your salad. And it's important not to overeat it. 1 tablespoon or 2 tablespoons at the most for 1 meal is sufficient. Okay? And that'll be good. I think we need to close. It's after 9 o'clock. I've held you too long. I appreciate your staying. I appreciate your questions. I enjoy sharing with you. I think you've noticed that. It's my passion to teach people how to live healthy lives. And it's God's will that we be healthy and happy.
Amen.
So let's stand and have a word of prayer to close this video. Gracious God and loving Heavenly Father, we praise you tonight because we can call you our Father, because you have adopted us into your family. Father, forgive us when we have been rebellious, stubborn. Father, forgive us when we have done things wrongly, many times ignorantly, sometimes by choice. Father, forgive us and cleanse us. We ask that you transform us by the renewing of our minds, that we may prove that which is your good and perfect and acceptable will. Father, I pray a blessing for each and every person that was here this evening, those that have already left. Bless them too. Bless those who are still here. As we leave tonight, protect us and keep us. Father, help it tomorrow night we can come back and continue to learn of the simple things that you've given us for promoting health. And we just praise you and thank you for each and every one of them. And we honor you in Jesus' blessed name. Amen.